This is the weirdest thing Bambu Lab has ever sold, the TPU Feed Assist Module for $50. A handful of creators have tried it, and the verdicts land somewhere between barely does anything and makes TPU prints noticeably more reliable. But there's one case nobody's tested, so I did. Because in that case, this little thing is the difference between a print that comes out like this and one like this. So let's find out who it's actually worth it for. The TPU Feed Assist Module is supposed to make printing TPU more stable and reliable. But why is TPU such a pain to print in the first place? TPU is a flexible thermoplastic, so you can melt it down again and again, and it's soft. It comes in different hardness grades from fairly stiff to really soft. And that's exactly where the trouble starts. The softer the TPU, the more it stretches inside the tube the moment there's friction. Because the extruder pulls the filament off the spool through a PTFE tube that's more or less long. The longer and more winding that path, the more friction the extruder has to fight, and the more spots where the filament can snag. At some point it gets critical. Picture pulling on a cooked noodle. Pull it hard enough and it just tears. That's the moment where your print fails. Same with soft TPU. The extruder has to drag it off the spool, feed it all the way through the tube and still meter it cleanly at the nozzle. Past a certain point, it just can't do that reliable anymore. So here's Bambu Lab's answer to this, the TPU Feed Assist Module. It works a little bit like a cyberbrick set. You basically buy a few electronics and you print the housing and the frame yourself. Files are on MakerWorld, of course. Inside there's a small motor, a feed wheel and a sensor. Keep that in mind, you will need it in a second. The module sits between the spool and the printer's extruder, right at the start of the filament path. It grabs the soft TPU at the spool, actively unwinds it and pushes it towards the print head. Its built-in sensor notices when the filament reaches the actual extruder, and the moment the extruder pulls some TPU, the module pushes exactly that much in behind it. So the filament stays under light pressure the whole time. The result? The print head extruder no longer has to deal with all that tube friction or drag the filament off the spool itself. The module takes over that job. So really it's basically a second extruder motor just outside the printer. Pretty clever idea if you ask me, but the real question is, does it actually do anything in practice? The module works with pretty much every closed Bambu Lab printer, P, X and H series. So I bolted it onto my P2S first. The big selling point? It saves you the awkward direct feeding into the printhead that Bambu Lab recommends for very soft TPU in its own wiki. With the module, you just hit a button, thread the filament and it feeds into the nozzle itself. For a test print, I went with the air slider. With the module, it runs clean without any problems. But then I wondered, what happens if I ignore Bambu Lab's advice and just push the filament straight into the PTFE tube without the module? So I ran exact the same print again. Same settings, just without the module, off a regular spool. And the result was a letdown. Without the module, the print runs just as clean. I really can't spot a difference. On the P2S at least, the module did basically nothing. So I wondered, if it does nothing on the P2S, does it do anything anywhere? And that's exactly the one case nobody had tested, the H2C. Because that printer is a whole different beast. The much bigger build volume means a much longer filament path, the exact critical case. Maybe Bambu Lab had the H2 series in mind here all along, more than the P and X. In my last video on TPU on the H2C, I had to print a whole top feed spool holder just to get soft TPU running reliably. And that was a real hassle. The H2 series is generally a bit finicky with TPU, and even Bambu's own wiki shows it. The specs for which nozzle does what contradicts each other in places. Honestly, I can barely follow it myself. So I just went for it and fed the 85A TPU through the normal path on the left nozzle. Same model as on the P2S, but this time with PLA supports printed on the right nozzle. And this is the truly critical case. On the H2C and H2D, the left nozzle moves up and down every time the filament switches. So the TPU's filament path changes with each switch. On top of a whole string of error messages, the print without the feed assist eventually failed when the prime tower toppled over. But even before that, the filament wasn't feeding cleanly. You can clearly see it on the print itself. You can see the extruder straining to push the filament through. The friction over that long H2C path is just too much. And that's exactly why I was curious whether the Feed Assist module could actually stabilize this print. So I mounted the module where the external filament holder normally sits and ran the same print again, identical settings. And after more than 10 hours and 57 minutes and over 600 filament changes, the print stands here on the H2C, complete without a single failure. The print quality is clean, first layer to last. So is the TPU Feed Assist a clear buy for H2 owners after all? Well, there are still a few things that bug me. First, the module kind of wrecks the look. The support arm isn't exactly solid and the whole thing feels like a DIY mod, which, fair enough, it is. Maybe that's not a big deal for you, but I think a lot of people buy Bambu Lab specifically for the clean look, and that takes a hit with this wobbly add-on. And let's be real, this module has its limits too. Go even softer on the filament and at some point it won't feed reliably either. But one thing is the absolute deal breaker for me. Bambu Lab didn't build this module properly into the printer's control. The 4-pin connector is literally just a power supply. The printer has no idea the module is even attached, which means you have to press the unlabeled buttons on the module in exactly the right order to unload and load filament cleanly. And I'm pretty sure, leave this thing in a drawer for a couple of months and the next time I will have completely forgotten which buttons comes first. It's just annoying. From a company that otherwise integrates everything down to the last detail, it feels strangely out of date. So my call. For most people, the module isn't worth it. If you got a P or X series printer, or you only print very soft TPU once in a blue moon, save your money. A well-placed external spool does the job just fine. But if you own an H2 series printer, print soft TPU regularly, and don't want to bolt a whole rig onto your machine, then for $50, this thing is a really useful add-on. I'm keeping the Feed Assist on my H2C for now, and I'm curious, how do you feed your TPU? Straight in or through the normal filament path? Let me know in the comments. Right now on the same H2C, I'm printing shoes like these for a few bucks of filament. The kind Nike and Adidas sell for a few hundred a pair. The question is whether a shoe from your own printer can actually keep up with the store-bought ones. I wore 2 pairs for weeks and in the end it all came down to one single thing. And that's what I'm showing you in the next video.